Right, second. All right. Also, a few years later, we invented the first direct method to measure LDL cholesterol or bad cholesterol. And I did my doctoral dissertation on cholesterol. So I think I'm in a good position when I see a good thing. So this is how sunshine lowers your cholesterol. This is a theory right now. It's not proven. So you might want to wait for the science, but the theory is by Dr. Stephanie Seneff, and she's a professor at MIT. And the theory is when your skin and retina are exposed to sunlight and in the presence of sulfur, produces cholesterol sulfate. And also, it's the mechanism which sulfonates vitamin D to make it transportable. So when these compounds are transportable, they make fat-soluble molecules more hydrophilic, and they can get to where they need to be in your body. So this is cholesterol sulfate. You can see the hydroxyl group there has been replaced by a sulfate group, which has a negative charge. That negative charge is very important. And your body has one pathway to make cholesterol sulfate, and that occurs in your normal cells. The sulfosyltransferase converts cholesterol to the cholesterol sulfate, and the sulfatase goes the opposite. But according to Stephanie Seneff's theory, there's a second enzyme called endothelial nitric oxide synthase, which is replete in red cells, which can also do the trick in the presence of UVB light and sulfate, of course. Both need sulfate. So your skin acts like a sulfur battery attached to a solar panel, which is your skin. Similar to what plants do for photosynthesis to produce energy. There are people called breatharians who believe that humans can exist without food. I don't recommend it, but they believe that you can get all the energy you need from sunlight, which they call prana. There is a lot of sulfur in food and high levels in eggs and vegetables. Esther and I supplement with MSM, which contains sulfur, and there are other supplements that contain sulfur. But by far the best way to get enough sulfur in your body is to take an Epsom salt bath, which is magnesium sulfate. So sulfonation makes this water insoluble molecule, cholesterol, water soluble, just like a sulfonation in soap. There's lots of ways to get UVB. This time of year, it's pretty much impossible in the northern climates. The angle of the sun is so low, even if you took a walk outside all day in your bathing suit, you wouldn't get very much UVB, and it might be a little cold. So it's a great idea. Go to Florida this time of year, get rejuvenated with that sunlight. You can use a lizard light. Regular sunlight's great in the summer, spring, and fall. Take off those sunglasses. Your eyes can also absorb that UVB light. So don't apply sunscreen for 20 minutes. Your doctors don't tell you that. They say you should lather it on first thing in the morning. That's going to block those UVB rays. You need some. Leave it off for 20 minutes, in my opinion. And just this morning, I used my UVB lamp. And there's the wavelength. It's around 310 is the UVB range. Hold on, my slides are not advancing. No. There it goes. I've got to start my share again. Sorry about that. And looks like my presentation closed. It's going to take me a minute to open it. Okay, let me go down. I've got it open. And we are here.
Kathy, I think this is the curse of the presenter. Last month, it was Bill Parkus who was the presenter, and his web didn't work.
All right, but can you see
There
it
we are.
now? Don, can you see my presentation?
No, I don't see it.
Okay, hold on. How about now?
There we go. Yes, Murray.
All right. So sterile sulfonation is not only important for transport, let's see, it's not advancing again. There it goes. Cholesterol sulfate surrounds the red cell and also the endothelia, which is the inner lining of your arteries and veins. And that negative charge prevents it sticking to the endothelial cells or the red cells sticking to each other. Now that enzyme I was talking about, endothelial nitric oxide synthase, is replete in red cells. And there's a lot of it in there, and it doesn't make any sense for it to be there because normally it creates nitric oxide, which would poison the hemoglobin just like carbon monoxide would. So there's no good reason for it to be there except to make cholesterol sulfate. Now, if there's not enough sulfate, if your pH drops, your red cells will start to clump, or if there's not enough cholesterol sulfate to coat them. And it's called the Rouleau effect, and that's life-threatening. So it's your body's number one directive is to prevent that from happening. And to prevent Rouleau, your body will steal sulfur from wherever it can get it. If there's not enough in your diet, it can steal it from your joints and you can get arthritis. It can steal it from your neurons, the coating of your neurons, and you can get MS. And low sulfur levels have been found in Alzheimer's disease. This is a publication from the National Institutes of Health. And it says that cholesterol sulfate inhibits HMG-CoA reductase, which is the same enzyme that's blocked by statins. So if you keep your cholesterol sulfate high in your body, you may not need a statin. And what happens if you don't have enough cholesterol sulfate is your body starts to make cholesterol in hopes that it finds some sulfate somewhere where it can sulfonate it. So just to recap, recharge your solar panels. Now, those 4 factoids. On Crete, that volcanic island, the local farmers grow their vegetables in the rich sulfur-containing volcanic soil. And that's why I believe the rate of heart disease is 5 times lower than on that limestone island. Same thing in Okinawa. And guess what, people? There are no volcanoes in Michigan. And in the summer, coronary heart disease and congestive heart failure rates go down. And these were in the UK, and we're in the same latitude as they are, and we don't get as much of that UVB light. In fact, we don't get much at all in the winter. All right, so live long. Sulfur and sunlight are important for your heart. Okay, that's the icebreaker. Now let's talk about solar panels. There's enough solar energy generated in 1 hour that hits the earth that will fuel all of man's activity for an entire year. So it's our job to collect some of that solar power. So why solar? There's pros and cons of getting solar panels. The main one is reduce carbon footprint. I think that's why most of us came here. We want to do something to heal our planet and stop this climate change and climate volatility that we experience on the news on a daily basis. Other advantages, of course, it's going to save you money on your electricity bills. The government is giving you a 30% tax credit. You can even, if you get a battery system, you can be independent from the electric grid if you have enough panels. Little maintenance is required, and they're good for about 30 years. There are some cons. They have a high initial cost. They're weather dependent. On a cloudy day, they generate very little electricity, and of course, snow covered, they won't generate any at all. You can remove them from your roof, but it's kind of tough and expensive. So I recommend just leaving it on your home if you're going to sell it. There are limitations. If you have a shaded roof or your roof isn't facing the right direction, that could be a problem. It may not be as efficient. And it may take up space if you're going to put it on the ground. All right, I got this idea from Larry, who's our next speaker. He showed me the article where if you install solar panels on your house will sell for 4.1% more. And if you have a home in Ann Arbor, that's going to more than pay for your solar panels. Probably pay double what you're going to pay. Houses in Ann Arbor aren't cheap. Now, people ask, well, wouldn't the solar panels work better down south? Well, yeah, they do. But, Michigan has pretty much only 15% less sun than Florida. So it's not horrible here. Here's a chart that shows the cost of solar is just dropping precipitously, and it has since the 1980s, when solar panels really first became doable. And both the price is dropping and the number of solar panel modules installed has been increasing. And although there's been a slight blip lately where the prices have increased slightly, this has got to increase. And the reason for that slight blip is our State Department is blocking purchase of silicone, which is the major component of solar panels, sourced in the Uyghur region of China due to human rights violation. Of course, also, we've been hit with inflation this last year, as you all know. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Larry. I'm going to stop the share. And we'll let him continue. All right, Larry, you're muted. Larry, there you go.
Okay. I'm having another Zoom problem. I don't know why it keeps doing this to me, but is it, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Is it full screen or is it still small?
You need to start your presentation.
There, okay. Oh my goodness, I have to go back here, sorry.
Now just click on that icon at the bottom, right next to your slide bar.
Okay, here we are. Okay, so I assume some of you know who Homeland Solar is. A lot of the installations that we do around town, you wouldn't know it because
Hey, Larry,
you can't see them.
we're still looking at your slide sorter view. You need to start your presentation.
My screen says I am, but you can't see my first screen.
I think this will work. Go ahead.
Okay, Murray, what are you seeing?
I'm seeing your slide sorter. So I'm like, 80% of your screen is the slide you're talking about. That's fine, but we can see your,
If you click on slideshow, I think it'll start.
slideshow.
Yeah, that's what I did. I'm actually seeing my slideshow. I'm not sure why.
Right.
I think it's just fine the way that it is.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so here's just a small number. We're headquartered here in Ann Arbor, so we are a local company. One of our first faith-based organizations in Washtenaw was Genesis, and Murray was involved in that, and that led to a number of our other installations around town. Huron Ophthalmology, for example, that's an all-electric building. It's got a geothermal heat pump. There's no gas at all in that building. That's 165 kilowatts of solar power on that roof. It's a ballasted system. Food Gathers, that's 160 kilowatts. If you ever been to Food Gathers right off of Duvarin Road on 1 Carrot Way, it's a very nice drive up 1 Carrot Way and seeing this very, what I think is a very impressive array of solar panels. Zingerman's mail order, that's 180 kilowatts. We've done Pattengill School, we've done Bryant School, we've done Pioneer, and we've done Westerman. So we've done a number of schools. And of course, most of you are probably familiar with Washtenaw Dairy. So we have a very big footprint here in Washtenaw County. So can everybody see this slide?
We're still seeing the first slide that shows the 6 installations.
That's interesting. I don't know if it's just a lag of the performance or what.
Why don't you go get out of presentation mode and just click on the second slide.
Okay, what are you seeing my second slide? Anyone?
No.
Let me start over again. Let me stop share. Okay, let me start over and see if it gets better this time. You see it now?
Not yet. There we go. Same as before, though.
Does Larry have 2 monitors? I've seen this come up often when people select the wrong monitor and they have to choose that.
And Larry, you're muted, but sometimes when you go to share screen, you have options of what to choose. And then sometimes if you choose show your laptop or show your screen versus the slide presentation, it can be confusing.
Okay, yeah, you can't see my shared screen.
No.
No.
I don't know.
Well, you know what we could do, Larry? If you email it to me, I can present it, and then we can have Julie just go next.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not sure what's going on here, but I will email it to you.
All right. So let's bring on Julie.
Let's see if this works for me.
Yeah.
All right, let's see here.
And we can see the first slide now.
All right, are you seeing slideshow mode? Like just the slide?
Yeah, it's good enough. Yep.
It's speaker mode with the notes showing.
Oh, and I have no notes, but okay. So interesting, this Zoom, and I do Zooms all day long, so who knows? But anyway, you'll just see the next slide. So this works. Okay, so I was asked to come and talk about what we're doing in Ann Arbor to help people access solar. And I have to say, I absolutely loved your description of what motivated you to do the climate hero stories, because this is what gets me up every single day is connecting people with other people, connecting people with resources, connecting people with information, and watching people become agents of change beyond themselves. So there's one thing to do with your own carbon footprint, and it's another when that starts getting viral and you can watch that change be community wide, and you can watch us do something as a community. And that is, that just, like I said, it gets me up in the morning and it keeps me out of therapy because otherwise my climate anxiety would be, disabling. So I like to say it's better than like Xanax or something, or Zoloft or one of those things. Anyway, so these are the sorts of things that we are doing in Ann Arbor to help people access solar. So you all know, I'm sure, but just to review, in 2019, late 2019, the Ann Arbor City Council declared a climate emergency. And when you have an emergency, you act like it. And so based on that declaration, which, by the way, was made because of climate activists and our population and our citizenry continually advocating for action, they directed the Office of Sustainability and Innovations, which is us, which I didn't even introduce myself, by the way. I am a senior energy analyst at the Office of Sustainability and Innovations, which is a city office of Ann Arbor. So they directed us to come up with a plan to get to carbon neutrality community-wide by 2030, which is kind of crazy insane, and nobody has a community-wide carbon neutrality plan as aggressive as that. But it's also based on science and urgency. And because it's such an aggressive, robust, and necessary target, it's making us really creative and it's making us kind of sprint at it. So we created, with a ton of community input, technical experts, town halls, maybe lots of you, 820, and that is our plan to get to community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030. So the 820 plan has 7 overarching strategies in it. So the first one is powering our community by 100% renewable energy, and there are many ways that we are moving in that direction. The best energy, the best renewable energy is that we can build right here in our footprint. So solar on a rooftop, solar on a carport, solar on our commercial, industrial buildings, our municipal buildings, build it here, because then you don't have transmission losses. It's not built far away. It doesn't require large scale distribution systems. It's here, and every kilowatt of solar that we build here is a kilowatt of energy we're not taking from coal or gas. So we build it here. Anything we can't build here in our footprint, we build nearby if we can, and anything that we can't build or build nearby, we procure it from the market. Number 2 is electrification of things, because we're burning natural gas all over the place in all of our buildings. And if you're paying any attention to the media, you're starting to learn how not only is that bad for the climate, but bad for health. So as we clean up our electricity grid and have clean energy, we're using that clean energy to power our appliances, our heating, our cooling, and everything else. Energy efficiency is the 3rd pillar, because we have to use less. The more we can conserve and the less we use, the less we have to produce to begin with. The 4th one is a 50% reduction in vehicle miles traveled, what we call. So we want to invest in pedestrian and biking infrastructure and public transportation, and then start to electrify our vehicles as well. Fifth is developing a more circular economy so that what we use goes to its highest and best use and is not just dumped into a landfill, and that we're reducing how much we're using. And then, of course, improving resilience, because climate change is here and we need to adapt, and we're going to continue to need to adapt. So here, what I'm talking about is solar, and that is relevant in our first and probably the biggest strategy that we have is procuring 100% renewables for our city. So to that end, well, let's talk about this. Why distributed? I mentioned it briefly. Distributed generation, when we say distributed generation, it means that generation of solar energy distributed amongst lots of small sites, as opposed to, say, a great big solar field, utility scale generation. Distributed generation refers to rooftop solar largely. We get immediate clean energy. You don't have to negotiate with anybody. You don't have to go to lawmakers. You don't have to fight DTE in court. You don't have to do anything. You just put up the solar and it starts producing. So as much as we can do now, right now, we want to do that because we're in an emergency. That's why. While we're working on everything else, right? While we're working on the big solar installations and wind and clean energy. We have, as I mentioned, no distribution losses. The energy goes from your roof into your house, powers everything. It's very efficient. It increases our community's resilience if we pair it with battery storage, which is happening more and more now, because that battery can act like a generator for backup power in a power outage. It can reduce energy burden to those who are most energy burdened, the lowest income in our community. And in fact, Ann Arbor is working in the Bryant neighborhood. I don't know if you are familiar with that neighborhood. It's in Southeast Ann Arbor, and it is our most socioeconomically challenged and highest number of BIPOC people. And it is a energy justice or climate justice community by every definition. They are built next to a landfill, next to a highway, on a floodplain, and they are suffering sort of the worst of energy burden in our community. So we have been grant funding, I think Homeland's a part of this, grant funding to start decarbonizing that neighborhood, which will include solar. To reduce their bills. It's also why distributed generation, because if you own your own solar, if you own your own generation, and it pays itself off eventually, and it reduces your bills in the meantime, you are also eventually going to help offset the operational cost of electrification. So even though electric appliances, like an electric or a heat pump dryer, heat pump water heater, heating and cooling, these things are far more efficient than gas burning appliances, but electricity costs more than gas in Michigan, because that's just the way it is, because that's what they charge. It's a long story. So in the meantime, even though you're using less energy and cleaner energy, your costs can go up depending, maybe a little bit, maybe more. So reducing your cost of energy over time can help offset that operational cost of electrification. And then in addition, it creates a sense of ownership and engagement with your energy. So the people that I work with that go solar, oftentimes wind up kind of knowing more about where their energy is coming from, being more thoughtful about when they're using it and how much they're using, and start on the path towards electrification. It's kind of like a gateway drug is how I kind of think of solar. So some of the things that Ann Arbor's done, this predates me, but we have created an expedited solar permitting system so that I don't know if you've ever done something like an addition on your house or a big remodel. Permitting through the city is not cheap and easy and quick for most things. Not my fault. I'm not involved. But in the case of residential solar, as long as the installation is straightforward and rooftop and under, I think, I don't know, 13 kilowatts, which most are, we have a low cost or no cost permitting system with very little information required and a relatively fast turnaround. So we're trying not to hold things up. The city is also working on easing up some of the restrictions on solar. We've already done some of this work, but in just last month, the Planning Commission of Ann Arbor passed an ordinance that would enable front yard solar with certain setbacks. There are yards in Ann Arbor with big front yards and the house back from the road. And so this should be going to City Council soon that for their consideration. In 2019, this is an important change. This was made at the state level. The legislature reversed a previous law, and that previous law required a property tax reassessment upon solar adoption. So somebody would go ahead and get solar on their home, and then the tax assessor would come reassess their home and increase their property taxes, which was a massive disincentive to get solar and crazy given our climate goals. So happily in 2019, the legislature bipartisan got rid of that law. Whitmer signed it. And so that is not going to happen. Your property taxes do not change. Your property value goes up. Some of the real estate research says by approximately 4% when you go to sell your property, and probably higher than that in communities where there is a lot of solar already. And happily, Ann Arbor is becoming one of those. So then there's my program, Solarize, which I know some of you are certainly familiar with. This is a program that we've now been doing for 3 years. It is a group buy program where community members who are going solar are choosing installers that they want to work with from a sort of a vetted group of installers. And then they are reaching out to their friends and neighbors to come together, sharing their solar plans, sharing their story about why they're doing it. We have these group meetings, they're all on Zoom now. And I come to the meeting and we talk about solar and how it works and why do it and what are the costs and what are the paybacks and what's a battery and all of those things. And the installer comes that's working with that group buy and answers questions about themselves and their company. And then essentially, depending on the number of people that move forward in each group, the installer is able to pass on their savings, and the group can get significant savings on the cost of their installation. So that oftentimes, usually the bigger the group, the more savings that people are able to get. And the process I help with. And so sort of it's a kind of a ongoing process. It lasts about 2 months to run through the whole group and see how many people are moving forward. It's been really, really fun as a program. Larry is and Homeland participate in the program along with approximately 10 other installers. It's led to some really fantastic community building as residents reach out to their neighbors and their friends and their congregations and their book clubs and come together to learn and become part of something bigger. It's a safe learning environment. You're not calling an installer who's trying to sell you something right off the bat. You're coming to learn in a sort of no stress environment. And like I said before, it's kind of a gateway oftentimes to that, the next steps of learning more about where your energy comes from and what you can do about it, because it's really overwhelming. Like Murray said, and it's just, you know, you're sitting here with this weight of climate change and what can I do as just one person and why does it matter and is it important? And this makes it easy. It sort of gives you an easy button for some of the work. So just to give you a feel-good story about your community here in Ann Arbor, this is what solar installations looked like in Ann Arbor From, this is like 2000, this is 2010, this is 2019. In 2019 was a big bumper year because DTE changed the way that it reimbursed for excess generation. It's sort of complicated and long story, but basically they made it not quite as beneficial to get solar, so it takes a little longer to pay off your system. So anybody who knew that that change was happening jumped on the bandwagon and got solar. So this was a big bumper year, and we thought it would go back down. But right about that same time, we started the Solarize program. And instead of coming back down to baseline levels, you can see what's happened with solar adoption in Ann Arbor. It's just gone skyrocketing, which, like I said, has been incredibly fun. This is 2020, 2021. And I don't have 2022 on here because it just ended, but we met it. We got level with it, which I'm so excited about. So I haven't seen any slowdown in adoption. So that's been really exciting. And here is a really fun scatter plot of all the solar in Ann Arbor. This is the solar in Ann Arbor within the highways, right, of the city of Ann Arbor. And then we don't know all the solar that's gone up outside of Ann Arbor because we don't have that permitting data. But we invite anyone in Washtenaw County to come and participate in Solarize. So we do know a lot of it or some of it. And so we've got some scatter plot dots outside of Ann Arbor as well. And this map, it goes all the way up to like Whitmore Lake and Saline. So this is a little outdated already, even though it's only 2 months old, but we've done more than 32 group buys. We're pushing 3.9 megawatts, I think, of solar up in 3 years, which is a lot, let's just say. This is over 500 individual installations that have come up. This represents approximately $1.5 million in the upfront savings on solar through this program. And then even better, when you look at the 25-year lifespan of solar, the energy savings that people are manifesting in that time period is more like $15 million in the aggregate. And like I said, my favorite part of this isn't even the solar that we're getting up. It's really this huge new cohort of kind of what I call energy ambassadors, people who now feel connected to their energy, connected to their community, and part of the solution, and are looking for the next thing to do. So the other thing that we're doing right now, I'm in the process of working with the Ann Arbor 2030 district, which is a really wonderful organization that helps commercial buildings with energy efficiency and electrification, kind of technical assistance. And the 2030 district and OSI, we have come together and we are launching a commercial Solarize program to incentivize and help commercial entities access solar. This is different. It's not a group buy. It's more like kind of one-on-one concierge type assistance where we're helping in commercial properties do a pre-screen to see if they've got decent solar potential. We're helping them solicit and collect bids for projects with RFPs from qualified installers. We're going to help answer any technical or financial questions about expected savings and payback, things like that. And then after the installation is up, helping the evaluate and take a look at the DTE bills for the first few months after installation. So basically helping the commercial entities feel a little bit more comfortable and supported in the process of investigating solar, and a little safer with sort of oversight and some kind of one-on-one help. So there's a lot more that we're doing with solar in Ann Arbor, including purchasing a whole bunch of solar on municipal buildings with some of the money that has come from, it's not the millage, it was before the millage, and now I'm forgetting where in the budget the money came from initially, but we're purchasing a bunch of solar for municipal buildings. We are still kind of, it's on hold, but long story, but working on a big landfill solar project that would be more like a community solar project. And of course, we are working on how we're going to get the rest of it, right? Because we can get lots and lots of solar going now like this, but Ann Arbor's big and we use a lot of energy. And so we're looking at how are we going to get the rest of it to 100% renewables by 2030. So some of you may have heard of our proposal for a sustainable energy utility, which would enable massive building in a distributed way here in Ann Arbor, by becoming sort of our own utility that kind of coexists with DTE. There's other proposals on the table as well. So there is a group right now that we've hired to do what's called an energy options analysis. And that is being, they're in the process of it now, and hopefully even by spring, so really soon, we should be hearing the results of that energy options analysis so that we can take a look as a community about what our paths are to get the rest of the city that isn't doing their own rooftop solar to get on 100% renewables. So we are doing a lot because clean energy is, well, saying it's important is sort of, I don't know, it just doesn't quite speak to the scale. So that's what Ann Arbor's doing. And Larry, how's your technology? No, you're muted.
Yeah, I deleted the first slide, which seemed to was what causing the problem because it had just too big. So I sent it to Murray. Murray's presenting it here. I think you can see it, right?
All right, let me know when it's switching.
Everybody see it? Inflation Reduction Act?
Yep.
Okay, first of all, let me apologize. I really hadn't run into that quite so seriously. I'm not sure what happened. Anyway, I was talking earlier, kind of off the record about some really good news, and that really good news is really the Inflation Reduction Act. Really good news from the point of view is that government is doing something to provide carrots, not penalties, not tariffs and things like that, but carrots that will move both new jobs here from creating domestic content in our supply chain, but also a 30% investment tax credit extension for 10 years. So it's going to usher in a golden decade of solar and anticipating 40% renewable by the end of that period. That's really good news in my point of view, because now we're starting to lead, which is what our role should be, is to lead around the world, because we're one of the largest consumers of energy, and also major contributor of carbon dioxide. So, but it's not just that 30% investment tax credit that's been extended for the next 10 years. There's also a direct pay option, which makes it available, that same 30% available to nonprofits and faith-based organizations and municipals and schools and government. So the taxpayers of Ann Arbor benefit from that 30% as well, because it will reduce the cost of developing for the city of Ann Arbor, for schools in Ann Arbor, and all the faith-based organizations in and around all across the country, of course. And the other thing is it has some very significant incentives for low-income, helping low-income communities. There's actually incentives that increase that 30% to as high as 70% in some cases. It's a remarkable step in terms of making of energy equity. So I'm looking forward to a very exciting next decade of solar, and I hope you all are too. So next slide. Yes, okay. So one of the things, if you're interested in a journey to see what is capable on your home, there's a really nice tool. It's called Project Sunroof. It was developed by Google, and what it uses satellite information, and it can actually determine the shade on your roof by using a technique called using LiDAR from space. So if you put in your address into Google Project Sunroof, you will get to your home. And if your home looks like any of those homes on the right, that won't be good news. That's an indication that those roofs are heavily shaded. You can see those roofs are both heavily shaded and east-west. And of course, east-west is not going to produce as much energy as a good south facing roof. So as you move from right to left, you see the house that's better. It's got a south facing roof, but it's still getting a little bit of shade. And then finally, all the way on the left, you see a roof that's facing south, and it's glowing yellow and almost no shade. That's the roof that you'd like to have. But in Ann Arbor, of course, there are lots of trees. So that's available tonight if you wanted to do it. Okay, thanks. So one of the slides I like to use is just to explain how solar works at your home. So if you look at this chart there, you've got that gray area that goes all the way across 24 hours a day. That's your usage. That's how much energy you're using. That's what you call your load profile or usage profile. Solar doesn't know about that necessarily, so it goes about generating its energy based on time of day. And it wakes up in the morning and it starts peaking right around solar noon, which is actually about 1:40 in the afternoon here, and then it declines for the rest of the day. So really, one of the things you have to understand is when you are looking at solar power coming from a solar system on your roof, if you're using it directly, that's referred to generally as behind the meter, and that is offsetting full retail value energy from the utility. However, when you don't use it directly and are producing more solar energy than you're using, that's that light green part. If you could show that, Murray, where it says export, grid export, that energy, nope, next slide. Yeah, that one. Nope, one more, back. Yep, yeah, that light green area, that's energy that's being exported to the grid, and it's valued based on a tariff that is determined by the Michigan Public Service Commission, and it's roughly half of the value of the behind the meter solar generation. So depending on how much you have of each, that is how much you have of behind the meter and how much you are exporting, that'll change your financial payback. And obviously you want less. There's also another factor that figures into this, and that is what rate you are on. If effective March 2023, some of you may know this already, DT's already been sending out notifications. All of the customers are going to be moving from a standard residential rate, which is a tiered rate, it's a D1 residential, to a time of use rate. And the time of use rate is what they call D1.11, and it has on-peak hours that are from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until 7, when you'll pay a pretty substantial premium. But on the other end, the off-peak hours are all the other hours, and you'll pay much less than you're currently paying on your current residential rate. But if you blend it all out, you're paying just about the same. We ordinarily recommend using a D1.2 time of use rate. That rate has on-peak hours from 11 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night. That is a much broader range for on-peak, but that's when solar generates most of its energy, especially in the summer. So it's pretty much been, I've done a lot of modeling of this, and it actually produces better financial return on D1.2 than the new rate that DT is pushing you to, which is the D1.11. In any case, we're all going to have to get used to this idea. There's going to be times when you don't want to use energy. There can be times when you can use energy. So I found in every case I've looked at so far that if you have a solar system, you'll do best on D1.2 time of day, and that we typically move customers to that. And that's even more true if you have an electric vehicle, because if you have an electric vehicle, you can charge overnight, and that overnight rate is lower on the time of day rate D1.2 than it is on the rate that DT will try to assign you. So we help people through this process of determining what the best rate is and how to get there. So the next few slides, I'm going to talk about the process we go through. If you want to go through the process with us, the first thing we're going to do is ask for your utility bill. Your utility bill has a histogram on the first page, and that shows a rolling 13 months of how much you're using. And what we use that for, you're not allowed to put more solar on your roof than your last 12 months of usage. So we use that to set a top goal for how much you can put on your roof. You don't necessarily have to get to 100%, but you can't get more than that approved through DTE. And what we then do is do a preliminary design using aerial images. And we'll put the panels on the roof. We'll size it with an inverter, the inverter being the device that takes your DC current from your roof and turns it into AC current that your house will use. And that modeling that we do considers the tilt and orientation. If you have a solar panel, it's got a nameplate rating, say 400 watts of power. But it won't get 400 watts of power unless it's a perfectly incident ray, perfectly perpendicular to the panel. And that doesn't happen when it's on the roof, because the roof can be east and west facing, south facing at a different pitch. It can be a flat roof or a steep roof. So all that modeling has to take place, and that 400 watt panel becomes something less depending on where it's placed on your roof. It also produces somewhat less depending on whether it's got snow on it, and somewhat less depending on whether it's got a lot of shade. If you look at that picture, it's obvious there's a lot of shade in the east. So putting all that together into a model is what the first thing we do. And we have that when we go to visit. When we show up at your site, next slide, please, Murray. Then we validate everything. We've already asked all the questions about whether you're planning an electric vehicle, what are your plans for electrification, how much offset you want to get, what your budget is. We try to determine as much as we can to understand your needs as well as we can. And then we validate that and make sure you get all your questions answered at a site visit. Why a site visit? Because you can't really determine everything that you need to know from aerial images. And it's also good to be able to see the person you're going to be working with and as a representative of the company you're going to be working with. So what we do then is look at the roof, and very often things that can't be seen, like standpipes or sometimes chimneys, all that we verify on site. We also take pictures that will be useful when we come in to do the installation, because you have to have good understanding of what the process is, so they can make sure they have all the equipment they need when they get there. We also confirm the shade. Again, you can do some of the shade analysis via aerial images, but to really understand how tall those trees, you have to see them in person. So then we confirm all that shade, and we look at the how much energy you're actually going to produce from that solar system facing whatever direction it's facing, at whatever tilt it's at, given whatever shade it's at, and that helps you determine what the payback is, and that's the basis for whether you want to make a decision to go solar or not. Next slide, please. So once we have that, and you want to know what it's going to cost, so we then price it all out based on all the information, how much solar it's going to generate, and given our system design optimized to both what you need now in the short term and also what you might need down the road. And we provided this is our service agreement. It's basically one page. Actually, there's 2 pages, but the second page is every bit as simple as this. It has a description of your system. It has a description of the equipment that we're going to use, along with the warranties on that equipment, some of the features that are part of that solution, and then the terms. The terms being what it's going to cost and how you're going to finance it, whether it's going to be direct financing or whether it's going to be through Michigan Saves. I don't know how much you know about Michigan Saves. Michigan Saves is a green bank. It's funded by a grant from the Michigan Public Service Commission. They get their funds from local credit unions. It's an excellent organization. And we don't actually, we're just a partner with them. We don't do any financing directly. We just say, use Michigan Saves. It's best approach. And many of our customers use it. And so that's basically it. You say, I'm going to go forward with it. And I'm not sure, Murray, where did you go? And you sign the agreement, and then we start the project, put you in the queue, and we start the project. The project itself, next slide, please. Yep. Yeah, generally, the first thing we have to do, we have to file for the utility, for the interconnection, to interconnect the kilowatts that we're planning on installing. We have to go through the local permitting process that Julie touched on in Ann Arbor. It's expedited, very fast, very easy, but we still have to go through the permitting process. And then installation is scheduled, and that takes usually 1 day to finish up all the equipment, and a second day to finish up the electrical. And then after that, you're going to have to wait 2 or 3 weeks after it's been inspected by the permitting authorities. You're going to have to wait 2 or 3 weeks for DTE to show up. And what they do when they show up, they take the meter that you have and they reprogram it for bidirectional flow. The meter that you have now, probably, if you don't have solar, is one direction. You only pay when you're using current. But if you're going to be exporting to the grid, you have to be able to track that, and they reprogram it to do bidirectional flow. And after they've done that reprogramming, they just leave it running, and you're basically generating your own power. One of the ways you can tell whether you're generating power or not is monitoring. Each panel has an optimizer, and that optimizer also provides monitoring. So using a smartphone or the internet, you can look at the performance of all your panels every day if you want, if you're so inclined. You can look at past performance. You can see how much you've generated since you had the system, how much you've generated in the last month, how much you're generating every day. It's all there for you to see, all from this monitoring capability. And
Hey,
that's it. That's the
Larry.
Yes.
Larry, could we ask you to finish up in about 5 minutes? I want to leave time.
Yeah. Can you move to one more slide, and I'll just call it there.
Right.
A lot of people ask about batteries. Yes, we do batteries, and they're expensive, but a lot of people want them, and so we don't say no. And you know, they are an excellent form of backup power, but with limitations. The limitations are the battery has to be recharged. So in the winter, if you've got a cloudy day when the panels are covered with snow, you may not be able to recharge your battery. So it's got some limitations, but other than that, it's very quiet. You don't have any noise. It's very fast, and it's you know, it's a choice you make if you want to have that kind of a backup. One more slide, and I think I'll call it a day. If you will. Which one? Yeah, our solarized. So we are, as Julie mentioned, we've done, I don't know, Julie, 6 different solarized events so far. Our solarized discount is a little bit different than others. I think Julie would say that we probably would start at a lower cost than the other installers. And so our 5% installation, 5% discount really leaves us still, in most cases that I've seen, less expensive than the other installers. And but that's something you can find. We encourage you, if you want to get other proposals, absolutely do it. When you do other proposals, remember the #1 metric for measuring your financial payback, the likely payback, is going to be dollar per watt. If you're paying more for dollar per watt, it's very highly likely you will get a lower return on your solar investment or a longer payback. And so, you know, that's the #1 metric for comparing installers, dollar per watt, not return on investment, not payback. All those other metrics all are based on assumptions that are made by installers, and they make different assumptions than we do. So anyway, that's about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Larry. So sorry I had to cut you off there.
No problem.
But everybody give them one of these. Okay.
I wish we didn't have all the problems with the slides, but my goodness, what can I do?
All right, can we see this?
That looks familiar.
All right, Dave, why don't you talk about your installation?
It's
Okay,
Dave Gitterman.
Yeah, I'm Dave Gitterman. I'm Joe homeowner in this talk. I'm an example of this, and these last three speakers were all involved in the fact that I have solar. Originally, I heard about interfaith power and light when I sang in the Unitarian church choir, but then didn't think about it at all until Murray and David Lewis, who's also on the call, helped to instigate getting solar power on our house of worship, which was mentioned by Larry in Genesis. And we invested in this, taking advantage of the then 26% tax break. So that sounded nice, but I never thought that I'd have it in my house because we had east-west facing roof. And then I read about what Julie was doing with A20, and I contacted her and found out that even though I didn't live in Ann Arbor, we live in Pittsfield Township, I could participate. And so we met with an installer, and it sounded pretty good. And then I think my wife contacted Murray again, and he suggested that we talk to Larry. And so we did. It was a second quote we had. So we fulfilled the 2 quote criteria that Larry mentioned. And yes, it turned out that both Larry was a little bit cheaper than the other one. And we had experience with Larry because Larry's company did Genesis. So we decided to go with Larry. And on the 29th of August, we put a down payment down. And Larry warned us that they were very busy, but by the beginning of November, there were installers. And by the end of November, we had electric power. I guess I have a few pictures here. You can just move down. I don't have anything in particular. You can just see the solar panels on our house. And the last one is the various components of the system that I don't know if I can identify, but the one on the left, I think, is taking the energy from the roof, and I think it's converting it in the one in the middle. And Larry can correct me if I'm wrong. There's the new meter, the meter that's been redone. And you can see the line coming from the top of my house all the way down to connect to these two things. There's many more things I could say. That for one thing, we have a relatively new roof. So that was because if you have an old roof and you're going to need a new one, it's probably not a great idea to get the panels right away. The other thing is we have a generator, and Homeland Solar was able to work with us and make the generator play with these other components. And one other little gotcha was that Pittsfield Township is not as nice as Ann Arbor about permitting, and they have a rule that you have to have a 3-foot clearance with solar panels. So that limits you a little bit in how many panels you can have. But we have 24 panels on our roof. And as Larry mentioned, there's an app, My Solar Edge, that you can have on your phone. And so I consulted it, and it says that we have 345 kilowatt hours that have we've gotten off the solar panels in the maybe not quite 2 months that we've had it. So I think that's about a third of our power. And it is a very mild winter, so we haven't had snow cover, but we haven't had a lot of sun. And so to have about a third of our power done by the solar powers in a very cloudy part of the year, I think is pretty good. I think that's about all I want to tell you right now.
All right, well, thanks, Dave. And that piece of equipment on the left is an inverter, and it inverts the direct current coming out of the panels to alternating current.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Now, also, this is my house. I live in Dexter on a pond. You can't see it here, but would be at the bottom of the picture. And this was the plan that Larry gave us. And this is a picture of the actual panels. You can see the one on the left I took on Sunday morning, and the frost was just burning off 2 of the 14 panels on my house. We signed the contract with Larry in May, and by mid-August, we were up and running. And it only took a day for my installation, although they had to come back for the electrical hookup and spend another few hours the next day or so. And it's all working. And the one nice thing about solar panels is once they're up there, there's virtually no maintenance. And my inverter, it looked like Dave's inverter was outside. My inverter is in my basement. And we hear it clicking on in the morning. And I guess if we were down there at night, we would hear it clicking off. So that's my installation. Again, Homeland Solar did mine, and very happy with it. As far as electrical generation, DTU gets very confused when you put solar on your house. So I just got the last 3 months of my generation in one single bill, and I just got that today. And as Larry said, I'm paying for the electricity cost on my bill, not the distribution cost, but so far it's keeping up. And there are days where we're generating more, we're putting electricity back on the grid, but I'm getting a credit for that. So that's all been great. All right, so I'd like the 4 panelists to unmute, and we'll entertain questions. Let me stop the share. Are there any questions? Looks like David Owens has his hand up. Yep, you got to unmute, David.
David, you're muted.
Oh,
Okay, is that better?
that's better. Yep.
We have not discussed one of the major complications to doing this that has not even come up. We wanted to put solar panels on our house. It's one of the Traver Lakes condominiums. And the board of the Traver Lakes said, no, we won't let you do that. Now that's a huge obstacle. There's hundreds of places here and none of them are allowed to put solar panels on. And their reason is because they want all the units to look the same. That's not the good reason. The good reason for not letting us do that was just mentioned briefly a little bit ago, is when you have to replace the shingles. The shingles are going to have to be replaced before the solar panels, and you can't get at them because they're under the solar panels. So you have to pull all the solar panels off. We got around that problem on our house up north by putting in 50-year shingles. So somebody else is going to have to worry about that 50 years from now. But we have been unable to put them on here because the condo association won't let us. Is there any way to get around that? Can they be forced to let us do that?
I can take that one. David, this is not just your issue. There are more HOAs than you would think in Ann Arbor and probably in most communities. Sometimes people don't even realize that they're in an HOA until they want to do something. Some of them are very active with boards and bylaws, but this is a huge issue. So right now, more than half of the states, I believe, in the United States have laws that prohibit HOAs from restricting your access to solar. And as you might imagine, Michigan is not one of those, largely because we have been dominated by a legislature that was not friendly to pushing back against whatever the utilities wanted. There is legislations drafted. It's been drafted for quite some time and just sitting there and not being introduced in committee to to create that legislation here in Michigan that would ban HOAs from restricting your access to solar. The new legislature, as you might imagine, has a lot of people contacting it about all the things that they want. So they have a very busy, like, in the first 100 days, we want you to pass gun legislation. So it's, but it is a huge priority for our office, for our city, and for our residents. So first off, the first thing I would suggest that you do, and anybody who's in this situation, would be to contact your legislators in Michigan and just say, I can't get solar. This is not right. I should be able to access my own energy production and not be penalized by being in an HOA. Tell them that's what you're interested in, because they're going to have a lot of competing interests and vocal people. So that's number one. Number two, I've worked with HOAs, various HOAs in Ann Arbor, some of whom were, it just depends on the board, right? Some of whom the board was progressive and said, I don't care about these old bylaws and we're going to make an addendum and do it. And they use their external modification ordinance to sort of create some aesthetic considerations, like the panels have to be all black. And, you know, there's a few things like what the historic district does. I've worked with some HOAs whose boards are skeptical, but there was a big groundswell of interest in their community and they were able to push and get it. And I've worked with some boards who are just not, they're just not. I've come and met with boards. I've come and met with boards with their communities on Zoom. I've talked about solar. I've tried to demyth a lot of the solar sort of stuff that's out there. Our roofs can't handle it, or it's ugly, or it's going to decrease our property values crazy. All of these sorts of things. And also let them know that this legislation is drafted and maybe they want to get in front of it. I've done everything that I can think of, and it all depends on the board. So I know it's a long, and finally, we have an intern right now, Kylie, who I have working on what we're calling an HOA and MUD kit. MUD is multi-unit dwelling. So people who live in buildings with many units in them, they have issues getting access to EV charging. And in the same way that a lot of HOAs have access to getting solar. So we're putting together sort of a kit to help them talk to their boards, see what other communities have done, have pretty pictures of how it's not ugly, you know, stuff like that.
All right, thanks, Julie. Good answer. How about Ed?
Yeah, quick one, Julie. While you're talking to the legislature, Larry mentioned that you can only put as much solar on your roof as you're consuming. You're limited to that. But if you have a really big roof, you probably would want, since you're trying to hit zero by 2030, you would probably want to put an excess of solar on your roof if you could do it. So if they could change that little reg, that might help us out.
That's community solar, essentially. That's another thing that we're pushing for, that's on the legislative agenda, that our city council are pushing for. And you too can contact your legislators. Again, if this is important to you, they need to hear about it, because they're hearing about a lot of things. But community solar essentially means that I can put solar somewhere and cross a property line and power something other than my house with it and directly benefit that. So for example, a school has a big giant open roof, and all summer long there's no one in the school. And so we could theoretically maximize that roof space with solar and do wires to surrounding houses to benefit from the solar on that roof. Well, that's community solar, and the DTE has lobbied successfully and consumers to, we can't do true community solar in Michigan. It's not allowed, which is silly and ridiculous and absurd, because we're the ones funding it. I mean, if you're willing to put down the money for it, it just doesn't make any sense. But so yes, that is also on the agenda. So
my interpretation of that question was a little bit different, Julie. If you can only install as much solar as your last 12 months of usage, anticipation of future usage What we often do is oversize the inverter
Yep.
so that when that other usage does come online, all you have to do is add panels.
Right.
And
That's
that,
right.
if you're looking for legislation that would change that, that is badly in need as well. In fact, Julie, I talked to you about that. There's really no reason why a homeowner shouldn't be able to put as much solar on their roof as they want within, you know, a certain bound of, say 20 kilowatts, because that allows the homeowner then to plan how much solar they want for future use. And that would be a big aid for electrification. For example, when you buy an electric vehicle, you can count on needing 5 or 6 more panels. It's just a given. So yeah, we do plan for it, but the law says you can't add more than what you are currently using. That law needs to change.
Yeah, boo, I agree. And it's because they consider you like a mini power plant. If you're exporting more than it's just stupid.
All right,
We frequently export more than we're using up north. We've gone months and months where they're sending money to us.
Yeah. Yeah. In any given moment you can be, like in June, I'm exporting. There's no way I'm using what I'm producing because it's beautiful and sunny and bright and I'm not running an air conditioner and I don't have my lights on. So, but I'm exporting it to the grid. And it's the annual usage that they look at in order to approve your system. So what I use in 2023 on an annual basis. So in the summer, I'll be exporting and in the winter, I'll be pulling from the grid more.
Up north, doesn't do any of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of it depends on what utility you have.
Yeah.
You know, here, if you're a municipal, you can do the same thing. Every municipal can set their own rules. But we are a public owned utility here. We've got
Investor owned
DPE.
utility.
Yeah, I'm sorry, investor owned utility, correct. Sorry.
all right, guys, we have like 3 minutes left. If people want to stay over, I'm willing to stay over and answer more questions, but I just want to remind everybody that our next one of these Zooms is February 15th, and it's on locally sourced food. So sign up for that one. And I want to take Bob's question next. He had his hand up first.
Our house has a east-west facing roof. So according to Google, it's not profitable, no advantage to put solar on our roof. But we do have a big backyard, which has a lot more flexibility to put solar panels on the ground facing south. Now, Julie, you were mentioning that I guess the Ann Arbor City Council is considering some zoning changes that will allow that. And I was wondering if you could speak more about that, as well as maybe if the SCU is considering also what I'll call ground solar.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called ground mount solar. And right now it's allowed in your backyard. So you can do that now. As long as there's certain setbacks from your neighbors and you don't have a big sewer line running through where you're going to put the ground mount. But yeah, you can do it now. The changes are trying to liberalize a little bit about side and front yards, like things that are visible from the street. And yes, the SEU, which is this sustainable energy utility that we're proposing, in that case, we'd be our own utility. So we can make the rules. We'd no longer be bound by DTE's rules, and we could put as much solar up wherever anybody wanted it, and they can't do anything about it because we'd be the utility. So yeah.
Maybe Larry can speak about the advantage or disadvantage of ground solar.
Yeah, I can. We do a lot of ground solar. The disadvantage is you need some room. I mean, they will take up if you have a small backyard, it'll use up quite a bit of your backyard. But it provides generally a ground mount system. Remember when I was talking about what happened when you got a 400 watt panel and then it goes down differently depending on whether it's east or west facing south with tilt pitch and all that, shade avoidance. With ground mount, you usually have more flexibility because it's generally due south at the ideal pitch for this latitude of Michigan, 30 degrees, and you can position it as best you can within the setbacks on your lot to avoid the most of the shade. So you'll get, even though it may be a little bit more expensive because it's got a lot of steel in it. It pays back because it's an optimum generator of electricity. So yeah, well, it's just another choice, and it doesn't have all the issues with replacing the roof and all that kind of thing. So it makes a lot of sense if you got the room.
I just wanted to repeat that our house is east-west.
East-west, actually, everything starts to make sense as you bring the cost dollar per watt down. This is the first thing, one of the first things I discovered. East-west facing roofs do make sense if the cost is low enough for the solar system, especially if it's relatively flat. We do a lot of east-west.
So
Quite a
Dave,
bit.
what's your payback?
Yeah,
on your-
it's your payback will be longer on an east-west facing roof than it would be on the south, but it still can be a good payback.
I was told by your competition that our payback was roughly 10 years.
Oh,
Your payback on your system,
That's what we were told. Yes.
that's not uncommon. I would guess we see typically 8 years. I look at anything over 10 as being, Julie would probably shoot me, but 12-year payback is where I say, that you ought to think about, maybe doing something else. Sorry, Judy. Julie. 10
All right,
years is
so-
pretty good.
I mean, some of the payback calculations assume that our wonderful utility is going to raise their rates, which of course they
They
do.
will.
Yes.
Yeah, I've talked a lot about this particular thing. When you compare installers, a lot of times they will have a shorter payback because they will assume a higher rate escalation from the utility. And it's very sensitive to that rate because you can see it's got compounding. So, that's one of the things, that's why I say dollar per watt, because you can, to some extent, the payback is artificial, because if someone says you're going to get a 5% per year utility escalation, I don't believe that'll ever be the case, because the utility does not have that pricing latitude. They would have major defections if they try to do a 5% escalation every year.
And
which time of day ratings is DTE going to give people more money back during the higher peak charge rates?
A little bit, yeah. Actually, I've from the little modeling I've done so far with the new rate that's only going to be deployed in March, but I already know the rate. I can actually do the modeling now. It has indicated that solar will actually do better under the time of use rate than it did under the tiered D1 rate, which is the rate most people are on. It'll actually do better, but it's not significantly better, and not better than the D1.2 rate that we still are moving people to.
hey, Larry, there is a question in the chat from Doug. What dollar per watt seems reasonable in today's market?
We
I just-
typically,
Go ahead.
Julie, you want to
No,
answer that?
I just stuck an answer in there. The average in Southeast Michigan is about $3 a watt.
We hardly ever are over $3 a watt, I don't know what we were at. David, do you remember what we were at for your house?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
Yeah, I don't either.
Murray. We generally are in the neighborhood of 220 to 260. A lot of it has to do with scale. The larger systems tend to be lower dollar per watt. If you're doing a small system, you can be over $3 a watt. But I very rarely quote anything at over $3 a watt.
I have my hand up because there was a question in the chat, and I don't know if we have time for more questions.
Yeah, as long as people stick around, we can answer questions.
Okay, well, Julie asked a question about how is an SEU the same or different from a muni? I imagine that Julie might not be the only one with that question, so I'm gonna try and do that quickly, although it's a huge question. So there are folks in Ann Arbor who are very interested in a muni, and what a muni is short for municipalization, a municipal utility. So DTE is an investor-owned utility, so their bottom line is making profits for investors. That's sort of what they want to do, and they their second goal is to provide us energy. But a municipal utility is owned by a municipality, like a city. And so generally no need or interest in making profits for anybody, just delivering good service. There's a lot of very, very complicated legal reasons that we can't go to market on DTE. We can't renegotiate our franchise with DTE. Most places can. They can say after 20 years, their franchise agreement is up. You're not providing the service that we want. We want more renewables. We want better reliability. And you go to market and you see who can provide you what you want. But we don't have that with DTE. They're sort of a monopoly in perpetuity forever and ever. The Constitution does give us the right to do one of two things. We can either municipalize, meaning that we can take over from DTE. The Constitution gives us that right. We can take all their poles and wires and substations and transformers and everything and become the utility. The issues with that are huge. It's going to be enormously expensive. We can't take it for free. We would have to go to court for quite some time to figure out, well, we're going to say your infrastructure is a mess and it's blowing over every time the wind blows and it's not worth very much. And they're going to say we have a monopoly in stranded assets and it's worth, $10 billion. And so then usually this is a decade of court battles from what we hear. Boulder just tried to do this and failed. And then if we have it, if we get it, there's some good parts because then we can do what we want. The downside is that we're broke because we just paid for the DTE's infrastructure and the infrastructure is not what we want. I mean, it's really aging and problematic and now it's our problem. And we're not decarbonized. All we have is what we already have. So now we own it. It's 10 years down the road. We're kind of out of money and we're not getting clean energy yet because we just have what is. So you might be able to tell that I'm not a big fan of this. It is what maybe the community might want to do. We may end up going that route. So that is why we hired these folks to do this energy options analysis, to take a look at what would that look like? How much do they think it would cost realistically? And what are the co-benefits and problems? But in the meantime, the Office of Sustainability proposed a sustainable energy utility. So the other thing the Constitution gives us the right to do is to be a parallel utility, which historically is a really crazy and kind of stupid idea because you don't want to put up poles and wires right next to poles and wires that already exist because that's not a very efficient way to deliver electricity and then compete for customers. Like this is not something anyone's ever done because it doesn't sound very wise. But now with the advances in distributed generation, all the stuff we've been talking about, solar and batteries, now there's a path where we could be a utility that owns the generation. We own the solar. We put it everywhere that will let us. We bill you for the solar that we own. So you don't own it, but you're also not putting any money down. We believe our internal analysis is that the rates would be similar or less than DTEs and would not escalate like DTEs. And then you're hooked up to two systems. You've got your solar power from the SEU that you're getting a bill for, providing most of your energy, and we can maximize roof space and microgrid into schools and commercial buildings. And then you have backup power from DTE for the deep, dark winter days when your battery and your solar just can't quite provide enough. And the faster we build that out, the less and less of DTE's dirty power that we use. And we can help decarbonize the grid much faster that way. And we can create resilience because everyone will have to have a battery because DTE will not allow us to backflow into the grid because they do not like this proposal, as you might imagine. So your battery would be where you store your excess generation instead of to the grid and use it back. So you're using all of it, what they call behind the meter. So that's, I hope, Julie, that kind of answers your question. It's a really big topic and I didn't want to try and type it.
All right, thanks, Julie. I see. And thanks everybody for sticking around. This is great. Kathy.
Yes, Julie, my question is, I know that Ann Arbor has a lot of rental property, both large complexes and smaller ones and stuff. And most of the people that rent have to pay their own electric bills. So the landlord has absolutely no incentive to try to put up solar panels or do anything to offset. So for your initiative for 820, how are you going to incentivize the landlords to actually do something with their property?
That is such a great question. 55% of our residential people, 55% of the people who live in Ann Arbor are renters. That's a lot. And it's not all just students, it's just a lot of rentals. And it is a huge thing. It's what we call the split incentive. When the renter pays the utility bills and the landlord is the person who would have to invest in making things more efficient, for example, and improving insulation and electrifying and putting on solar. That's a split incentive. So we're doing a number of things. First off, if we do an SEU, it's going to make it a no-brainer because the landlords don't have to shell out any money at all. We can just, access their roof and just get permission. And then the tenants will be able to benefit from the reduced costs and get the clean energy. So that's would solve a lot of the rental problem. That said, if you have a really tall rental building and a lot of units in it, the roof space isn't going to be big enough to make a good dent in the usage for the people who live in that building. Now you're talking about community solar. You need that array to be somewhere else, and you need people to be able to subscribe to it. So we need that legislation, or we need to be a utility like the SEU so we can do that. And then the third thing is our office has drafted a green rental housing plan. And this is really interesting because the state of Michigan has another unfortunate legislative barrier where the city of Ann Arbor cannot create building codes that are more restrictive than the state level building codes. So if we want to say you need this kind of insulation or you need this kind of efficiency, we're not allowed to if it's higher than the state. But what we do is we issue certificates of occupancy for rentals. So we can say, in order to get a certificate of occupancy for your rental, you have to not only have, fire extinguishers and egress and safety measures, but you have to meet certain efficiency standards. And as long as we're not prescriptive, saying you need this insulation in those windows, we say you need to score X, and here are all the things that you could do to potentially score X. One of those will be solar. Some of it will be electrification. A lot of it will be efficiency. So that's in the works right now. It's getting fine-tuned, and watch for that in front of city council, and watch for some landlords that don't like it. So that too can use your advocacy. Maybe. We've worked very closely with landlords in crafting it to try and get them on board and take in their input and work with them to draft something that everyone can be pleased with. So but if you have other ideas, Mr. Kathy, because I can't see your name on the little thing, we are always all ears for innovative ideas.
All right, any other questions? I don't see any hands, so thanks for attending. We'll see you in February 15th. Thank you.
Murray. Thanks everybody.
Presenters. Thanks for everybody coming.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye, all.
You did a great job.
Thanks, Murray.
And it's Jack.
You're amped up.